We're live on the Plutopia News Network. Our guest tonight is Ramish Nadeem. The not ready for cable news players are here. John Lebkowski, Maggie Duvall, Scoop Sweeney, and our host tonight, Susie Sheeler.
Hi, everyone. How is everyone doing this evening? We want to do a quick check-in with everyone and see how everyone is.
Present.
All right.
Everybody's got to be somewhere. That's one of the laws of physics.
You guys are so awesome. All right. Well, I'm really happy tonight because we have Ramish, a rather new friend of mine, but I think we're getting to be better friends because we're working together more closely, and it's really exciting for me. And Ramish, he serves as the Muslim and International Youth Advocacy Manager at Advocates for Youth. He's also, he's a queer immigrant Muslim organizer and a Georgetown, Texas native who works with groups like Muslim Solidarity in Austin, Texas. And he is he's a founder and board member of Muslim Space and founder of Muslims and Allies. And welcome. We share the Georgetown, Texas part of our lives. I don't know how you feel about it, but it kind of freaks me out.
Yeah, totally. That was a little inaccurate. I came to Georgetown, Texas for college at Southwestern for those 4 years and was there for, I think, 1.5 years after that as well. So 5.5 years. Not a Georgetown, Texas native though.
Oh,
but yikes. Still a lot of feelings about Georgetown, Texas.
Georgetown. Yeah, Georgetown is not okay, I don't think. They have some issues there. And so recently you were actually you were overseas not too long ago. And how long ago was that?
Yeah, so that was for about 4.5 months. I was in Pakistan. I came back in January, so 4 months prior to that. Is that November, September, something in there, something in the fall. Spent some time in Islamabad and then touring around the northern areas a little bit, seeing what was going on there, and then a few weeks in Karachi as well.
Where you experienced Christmas.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's a really good story. I think it's a really interesting story.
Mm-hmm. About Christmas?
Yeah, when you went to the mall.
Oh, this is the story. Yeah, I have a couple of Pakistan Christmas stories. There was a couple years ago where I was actually detained on Christmas Day in Pakistan as well. So I was like, well, how did Susie find out about that story? But
you're the one who stood up when everybody said there's Muhammad in the room.
The Christmas story. Yeah, so I was in Islamabad, and in Islamabad, for sort of context, in the past a couple centuries, you had this whole there's a caste system ongoing in South Asia. There's poor folks who are disenfranchised and have been for decades, if not centuries, who end up doing a lot of the menial labor and the work. This is similar to all sorts of societies all across the globe where similar patterns take place. There's a class and a group of people, sometimes ethnically defined, socioeconomically defined, who do the work, who do the labor. And in a South Asian context, when Christian missionaries came over, this caste of folks was really, really excited to convert over into Christianity, to lose that sort of stigma of their particular caste and class status in an effort to do that. However, not so successful. It ended up being just that, that this Christian group and the Christian groups in this area were seen then as a continuation of that same caste pattern from before. So to this day in Punjab, the working class of people, the folks who are sweeping houses, who are cleaning gutters, who are in the streets, all of that stuff, are largely a Christian group of people. So that's a little bit about the context. I'm in Islamabad, and it's Christmas. Around Christmas, we're going up for Christmas, and I enter a mall, and the mall is decorated as like an American mall would be for Christmas in the mid-2000s, right? We've got giant floating presents, strings of lights everywhere, Christmas trees, all of this. And there's a pianist at the base of the mall who's playing like fucking Jingle Bells. Was it Jingle Bells or something else? Some very Christmassy tune. Everyone who is walking around the mall are rather like middle or middle upper class Muslim, largely Muslim folks. And it's this strange image because the people who are cleaning the houses of these folks who are walking around the mall celebrating Christmas in this strange capacity are Christian folks who would never, be stepping foot into this mall. If one of these folks off the streets try to get in, they would be stopped at the door. This isn't the space for them. If they're entering that space, they're entering that space as sweepers, as bathroom cleaners, as in this kind of capacity. And the cognitive dissonance
Really imagine.
is what struck me. Yeah.
That is just such a bizarre irony. I mean, it's just weird. It must have been absolutely surreal. And I'm sure you have had many experiences like that with the crossovers that are happening over there. I did want to talk a little bit about the themes and your most recent article in the Chronicle. You had, you brought up a whole lot of stuff. One of the things that was early on in the article, and I think, was the basis for the article, is the difference, the disparity between how reactive the police and law enforcement and lawmakers are with brown people, Black people, people from other countries, especially specific other countries mostly, and how they are with, the guy who went and shot up all the Asians and got taken in without incident, shot in the leg. What can you expound on that for us a little bit, and just tell us what you were thinking when you were writing that?
Yeah. So as you said, Susie, this isn't like an uncommon pattern. When I was writing this, I was thinking most directly about like the insurrection, the sort of uprising that had taken place at the Capitol, in this group of folks who had literally stormed this nation's capital. Really, an event that is kind of unprecedented in at least my memory, and in the memories of those that I had talked to, and the sort of calm, collected response of those folks being able to come back to their hotel, sit in their hotel, have a glass of wine, have a beer at the end of the day, fly back to their respective homes across the country, continue to go to their businesses and go about daily life. And the contrast between that and the summer of protests that had taken place just months earlier, in the wake of George Floyd's killing, and the police's reactionary response to that. So I was thinking about that contrast, but like you say, Susie, it's the same pattern that we saw in the past couple of weeks, where we had someone of a particular background engage in a disgusting level of violence, killing so many folks, and was able to be apprehended in a relatively collected kind of way.
And it was explained away.
And that's
so
heavy to see that disparity. Yeah, he just had a bad day. He was frustrated.
He had a bad day. Go ahead.
The guy that shot the protesters at a rally and then went and hung out with the police. They shook his hand, gave him something to drink, and sent him on his way. Imagine if that had been you. Would they have treated you equally well?
I think in asking that question, the answer. Not at all.
Yeah,
and if you go back to Georgetown Police Department, when they were, I would have my daily little walk home after, and it would be sometimes late at night, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. after dinner, all of this, where I would take a walk from my house in Georgetown, a couple blocks off of the sort of main center of the town, to a little park that we had a little ways away that was, open until midnight. Nothing like this, nothing sketchy was going on. And consistently, there would be a police presence that would sort of trail and inch along as I was walking down. I was like, dude, after the first day, the second day, the first week, the second, I'm like, you should know me already, Bob. Like, what is going on? Bob. You've seen me this many days.
You look kind of suspicious, though.
I mean,
yeah, the Department of Homeland Security would agree with you, John.
Well, the previous administration in Washington, I won't say his name, I'm just tired of it, did a lot of damage to Muslim communities throughout the planet, but particularly in this country. Do you expect a better environment under the Biden administration, or do you think a lot is going to remain the same?
Yeah, it depends on what we think of as better, right? So with the programs that I talk about in the article, I talk specifically about CVE, countering violent extremism, and TVTP, targeted violence and terrorism prevention. This is a program that was actually founded under the Obama administration, before the Trump administration. And the sort of like purpose of these kinds of programs is to have that softer policing tactic, right? So instead of coming out guns blazing with Islamophobic language and rhetoric, with Muslim bans and all sorts of stuff, with language like I think Islam hates us that I see displayed right now, it was sort of softer. It used terms that were coded as Muslim. It used surveillance of certain Muslim communities, but it did it in this particular kind of language that let them have a little bit of distance from it, right? So it's not as explicit as the Trump administration's condemnation, but it still continues to surveil these communities, to target these communities, to presume violence and extremist thoughts within these communities for really basic behaviors like having a beard or being critical of U.S. government policy. So yeah, I'm not optimistic about this administration sort of being backing away from the harm that was done.
Well, it seems that Texas, even in the Biden administration, is showing no intent to change their ways. You can still find plenty of heavily armed white guys showing up at the state capitol. And I would imagine if they were heavily armed Muslim youth, there would be a different response.
Yeah.
Well, there is a new group that's starting up. It's not a Muslim group, but it is a Black militia that I don't know if y'all have heard about. The Not Fucking Around Coalition or something like that. Yeah. And it's all people of color. I think it's primarily Black people who are forming a well-regulated militia, and they are going to start. They're going to start fighting back.
Yeah, well, the Black Panther Party did a similar thing in Oakland when I was covering the Black Panther Party. One of my favorite neighbor when I was living in East Oakland was one of the original founding women of the Black Panther Party, and she told me much about their organizing. And when the Panthers showed up armed with shotguns and pistols, and the Oakland police thought twice about that. And it was surprising. They were expecting a bloodbath, and instead they basically called them with, called their bluff.
Yeah. And when it comes to these programs like CVE and TVTP that I was talking about, they have their roots in programs that the FBI started that worked to target Black militia groups like you were talking about, or not even militia groups, just Black radical groups like the Black Panthers. So we have programs like COINTELPRO where we have the FBI selectively surveilling and looking at Black radical groups doing action that's well within their civil rights and liberties, but still targeting them, still surveilling them, still deeming them subversive and some kind of threat, and then engaging in counterintelligence programs against them. And so when you have programs that come up in the Obama era, like CVE, like TVTP today, these are programs that inherit that legacy and that history of anti-Blackness, recasted in an in an Islamophobic kind of way as well, have tons of anti-refugee sentiment in those programs as well. So it's all baked in, and it's part of a long tradition we've got in this country.
Yes. And do you find that it's that I feel like anti-Islam is conflated with anti-Muslim. I don't feel like people can understand that there's a difference. I mean, I think that there's a lot of language that people don't really understand about it. A lot of this. The use of the word terrorism, I think, is not used correctly. If you know what I mean. But I think that there are some. So, well, what do you think?
Well, I'm curious to hear from you, Susie, first. You said like there's the difference between anti-Muslim hate and then like anti-Islam. How are you thinking about that? What are you thinking about? Well,
I think that people think that all Muslims are part of an Islamic. I think Americans typically think. I think the people who stormed the Capitol think that Islam and Muslims are the same. It's a conflation of these of far right radicals that will come in and radicalize these folks to attack the Capitol, which in fact it's the exact opposite that happened. But what would you say? I mean, what do you think? Are all Muslims part of Islam?
Yeah, I think all Muslims would claim to be a part of an Islamic community, but what does that really mean in practice? Not much at all. It's not a unified identity at all. All, you know, in the same way that being a Christian across, you know, its multi-thousand-year history means a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, a lot of different sets of belief systems, all of that. Being a Muslim, for example, in South Asian context is very different than being a Muslim in Dearborn in the United States versus being a Muslim in Birmingham in the UK. And so each of these folks are, right, like individuated, fully fleshed out people. They're not, you know, drones of some kind of weird, scary entity called Islam, with their own beliefs, contradictions, practice, expansive identities, all of that good stuff.
Well, but you have people in any religion, I think, who can be more extreme. Sometimes we refer to fundamentalists or extremists. We certainly have that in the Christian religion, and I know there are Muslim extremists. And, you know, the fact that you are a Muslim doesn't mean that you're a member of ISIS. That's kind of what we're saying.
You don't ever
right?
hear the words Christian extremist. I mean, we went through crusades, but, you know, it's been a while since we brought up the Inquisition. Right now, Muslim extremist is pretty much the word for Muslim in this country. It's just a hyphen. You never say anything about these crazy Christian people who go do stupid stuff.
Well, we talk about Christian fundamentalists who have ideas that are, you know, difficult for some of us.
Well,
I don't know that we use the term extremist, but I think we do understand that there's a category of Christians who strike us as not being particularly Christian, right?
I think the words matter, though.
Yeah, and here I want to think about, right, like how do these words change and evolve just over the course of a couple decades, right? The same folks who are the Mujahideen extremist terrorists in Afghanistan today were the Mujahideen freedom fighters, the heroes, the people who our president Reagan invited us to think about them as though they were the moral equivalent of our founding fathers, right? Yeah. So in 1985, Osama bin Laden is in our world the moral equivalent of one of our founding fathers, and I'm sure he's confused about when he became a terrorist in the eyes of the government who sort of armed and facilitated his work. So these definitions change from decade to decade. Yeah.
Yeah, a good old boy Texan armed those Mujahideen with Stinger missiles. That was his patriotic duty, and that was the right thing to do at that point, simply because he was really fighting the Russians, he thought. But it's different now. If a congressman gave the same people Stinger, or the equivalent of Stinger missiles these days, there would be a whole different outlook on that.
Yeah, and our dance with Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, like, oh yeah, let's support you. Oh wait, no, it's not convenient anymore. So let's bomb the crap out of you. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not mention Latin America. But oh wait, we won't go there tonight. We'll cover that in another 20 million episodes. Okay.
On Myanmar, right?
Who is not a Contra again? Someone tell me.
That's right.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I do think that the language matters in that. I think that we should start using the words extremists for the Christians who, and I'm sorry, you know, the people who stormed the Capitol are more like the difference between Nazis and the Christians who went along with the Nazis. They're the Nazis, and then there are the Christians who will go along with whoever they vote for, right? So I feel like we should start using the words. We need to start saying domestic terrorists. We need to start calling these people what they are.
I worry about that though, Susie.
I do too.
Because this is how I also used to think, is that we need to label, you know, we have to have a consistent definition. If we call it terrorism here, it should be called terrorism here and here as well. Okay. But what I worry about, and this is an issue that was only raised to my attention because of you know, Somali Muslim young organizers who were thinking about this issue, is that whenever we expand the category of terrorists and this idea of terrorists, we then allow for more federal dollars and more federal funding to go in towards counterterrorism efforts. And inevitably, again and again, inevitably, we expand the program, we allow more work to come in, and then all of a sudden, who are they targeting and who are they surveilling? It's people who are refugees, it's people who are Black, it's people who are Muslim, it's people who are immigrants, it's people who are lower socioeconomic class. So when we expand the category of terror or terrorists, who are we actually hurting? What are we actually helping? Yeah, and it's complicated because I also feel the impulse to say, you know, if it's terror over here, we've got to call it terror over here.
Yeah, I mean, that is what you would assume would be equality. But at the same time, when you say the word terrorist, there's a certain image that comes into people's minds immediately, and it's never a Christian dude with a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it odd that the general public, perhaps, you know, particularly politicians, and even the news media, when there is a Muslim person who commits an act with, you know, weapons against people in this country, they are referred to as terrorists, as Islamic terrorists or Muslim terrorists. But when some crazy white guy who's a good Christian goes and blows people away in a movie theater or a shopping mall or wherever, he doesn't so often get called a Christian. He's never called a Christian terrorist. He might be called a crazy guy, but it's just odd, the difference in the way even the mass media approach that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. We have acts of radical violence. We have literally, like, Nashville saw a bombing this past year, a bombing in a major American city, but it's still not called terrorism. Yeah, or if it is called terrorism, then the faith all of a sudden doesn't matter in certain cases, but does in another. So, like, the same events, the same process of, wow, we can call it a process of radicalization or whatever can take place, but we're going to read it really differently if it's coming from someone with a certain set of identities versus another. Yeah, and then I also want to push back a little against the way we're talking about terror, and this is a common way to talk about it. We keep talking about these individual instances, individual folks, individual instances, right? This idea of like a lone wolf or something like this. When we look at terror in a broader sense, we can also think about things like state terror and state violence. When are states across the world engaging in a kind of violence against civilian population that is designed to terrorize them? And this is a much larger sort of, there's many folks who are dying from this kind of state terror more so than the terror of individual actors. And so, like, Susie, when you're talking about ISIS, right, we have this idea for some reason in our heads that ISIS is sort of like at our doorstep in our homes, coming across the border from Mexico, in some kind of sense that it's in, like, Georgetown, Texas, for example. And because of that, we're discriminating against the same refugees who are fleeing ISIS in their home countries, right? We're discriminating against Iraqi and Syrian refugees again and again who are fleeing this terror threat and who suffer from it at an order of magnitude that we don't, sitting in this country. So the vast majority of the victims of terror are, like, Muslim folks.
Yeah.
And and the terrorism here, the terrorism, I think, that we invoke on the surveillance level and the harassment level, that's sort of a passive aggressive violence in my mind. I mean, because it still is, it's hurting people. You change the way you walk home at night. You put your keys in your hands a certain way, right? I mean, it's a scary situation. And it seems like there's a certain group of people who are just hanging on for dear life because don't know if it's are you guys gonna make me feel the way I made you feel for the last 100 years, or if they're just really scared of equality. So
well, you know, state sponsored terrorism is an old American staple. Back in the 70s, when the government of Chile had a leftist, president elected, and Henry Kissinger came right out and said, just because these people in Chile decided to elect the wrong person doesn't mean we don't have a right to go in and change all of that. And they did change it. They had, him taken down, and they replaced him with a right-wing dictator. And that's happened so many times I can't even count it.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm looking at the map that's being displayed right now of ISIS incidents. It calls itself ISIS incidents. It says there's 152 cases that USA Today reviewed from 2014 to 2017. ISIS suspects were arrested, indicated, or died in attacks in these states. So here, who counts as an ISIS suspect, right?
Yeah.
These are largely not people who have any kind of direct affiliation with ISIS. These are people who followed. Oh, am I on mute?
Not
Sorry.
you, John.
Yeah, so these are people who sort of maybe had made a pro-ISIS statement on their Facebook or social media page, did something in the sort of comments, something like this. So we have to be
this was the
right.
point I wanted to make, that people will call themselves ISIS, but ISIS is not, as I understand it, it's not like, I mean, obviously there's some organization in there, but a lot of people consider themselves ISIS adherents who, it's not like they went somewhere and joined the club and paid their dues, right? They just say, I'm ISIS. Like this guy that shot up the supermarket in Colorado may say that he's ISIS, but it's not, what does that really mean?
It's like the Good Sam Club that you see on the back of like RVs and stuff. Like what? No, not like that.
Right. And when it's violence that's affiliated with QAnon groups, right? So this person followed conspiracy theories, was posting about QAnon, wanted to be affiliated with this movement, or before that there were other movements, other groups, all of this, neo-Nazi groups, all this. We don't name those affiliations, and we don't organize that threat by those affiliations and say who are all the people who had affiliated themselves with a far-right neo-Nazi point of view and engaged in violence in the United States.
Do you think we're going to do that a little bit more with the Capitol, since the Capitol insurrection, or do you feel that a few people who put their feet up on the desk will be prosecuted and the rest of them will get some minor social work that they have to do, like pick up trash, and that'll be that?
Yeah, I think it's going to look like another CVE or TVTP program, right? So we have these programs in place. We have an idea of how terror works. It's a false idea, by the way. All sorts of studies have shown that the ways in which we think about the process of radicalization when it comes to these federal programs is incorrect. Academics are all sorts of up in arms against this kind of stuff. It relies on a faulty perception of how radicalization works. But I think that we will continue to double down on the same programs, right? We'll say that there's a domestic terror threat. We see that this sort of Capitol insurrection happened. We should then, Congress will go and they'll fund a program like TVTP, if not TVTP, even more, expand that. The language in that will inevitably include a language around radicalization and terror. That's going to be the same language that we had 5, 10, 15 years ago, 25 years ago. Which will inevitably be language that is Islamophobic, that targets young Muslim folks, that targets young immigrants and these folks, right? So that's the response I expect, because this is what has happened over the past decade. And this is why, right, these young Muslim organizers are asking us again and again to not expand the category of terror in the United States, because it just comes back to bite them.
And so how do you get that message out? Because I think the majority of us, for example, at least Scoop and John, well, maybe not John, but Scoop and I think or thought that if you do expand you want to add someone to that list that expands it, which inevitably expands other things, rules and catch-alls and that sort of thing. So what is the alternative?
We already have these programs in place, right? It's not like there is a lack of law enforcement programs or mechanisms in order to catch and think and target these folks. These programs are already in place. We don't need a further expansion of funding for policing in this country. We've seen how that goes again and again. We don't need the same approaches to terror and to violence in this country. We've seen how that goes. Maybe a good place to start would be to look at how these social media dynamics in this country operate and facilitate far-right terror. Maybe that's a good place to look. Maybe supporting, I don't know, communities and giving them a reason to not be so disenfranchised would be a good place to look at as well. Yeah.
Of the communities, you do a lot of work with the Muslim community. And in fact, you're part of a program called IAMM. And can you tell us a little bit about what that is? I know that you, how long have you been with that? And you helped start it. Did you co-found that?
Yeah. So this is a program that was started, I think, maybe 2 years ago. I've been involved from the very beginning. We are working to interconnect American, Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern communities. So this is an inter-community program within these communities, right? So Susie, you said the Muslim community, right? From an outside perspective, it may look like there's a singular Muslim community. We're self-organized, we're collected, all this. But in reality, these are people who have immigrated in different decades. They're people who speak dozens at least of different languages. It's actually the most diverse, racially diverse religious community in the United States is the Muslim community. So we have racial divisions, we have ethnic divisions, we have religiously affiliated divisions, political divisions, language divisions, all of this stuff going on. But when we encounter programs that work against us, like TBTP, like certain law enforcement programs, those programs don't see those differences between us. We need to be organized in response to those programs. So as we heal from like the violence that was enacted, perhaps in home countries, or the difficulties that took place in the process of immigration and coming into this country, or the Islamophobic difficulties that take place once folks are in this country, as we heal from those, we start to form a community with each other, hopefully across the categories of Arab, Muslim, and Middle Eastern. And this is an orientation that IAM has where we want to be expansive with that category as well. We're not just talking to people who identify as Muslim and continue to identify as Muslim. We're also speaking to Arab Christians, which is a huge proportion of the Arab population in the United States. We're speaking to Baha'i folks who are not maybe affiliated with the label Muslim. We're speaking to people who were Muslim once upon a time but aren't anymore, but maybe still suffer from Islamophobia or still have something about their communal or cultural practices that remain Muslim. So it's an effort at a more expansive category. And we model ourselves off of like the Latinx movement in the United States, where once upon a time you had folks from all across the Latin American world who came and immigrated here, who retained strong identification with their particular home countries or countries of origin, and didn't organize collectively across those divisions. But over the course of decades, due to some really strong and amazing organizers that we look up to, they were able to create that common bond and identity.
That's wonderful, and I look forward to researching more. One thing I feel I was really lucky to experience when I was young, I was growing up outside of DC, and I was going to a private Christian school back when Christian schools weren't like crazy Christian schools or something. It was just sort of teaching you ethical principles in life, right? It didn't have this weird whatever the heck happened. But I remember like one of my favorite field trips we ever took was to the Islamic Center of DC, and just being, and of course this is 150 million years ago before you had, what happened in Iran and all that. And, but it was just cool because it was just like being in your neighborhood. It was like, wow, what a beautiful building. It's so peaceful here. These people are so nice. There was it just was not in my head. Like, these are people, I don't like these people, or these are wrong people, and I don't care of any, and I raised my daughter in some really interesting kind of alternative schools and stuff, but nobody ever mentioned doing anything like that, exploring different faiths or anything, I think because they were taking a totally secular approach. And it's like, it doesn't matter if you're secular, you need to know, about all the different world religions and so on and so forth. So I'd sure like to see a lot more of that kind of thing.
And where there are all kinds of places you can go to learn that kind of stuff too, right? I mean, y'all have programs, is that right? And y'all have connections with other folks through I guess the universities around here. I don't know about Southwestern.
Yeah. IAM has a whole history of participating and working with local orgs, usually based in the Austin area, also across Texas, and increasingly on a national level as well. I think for some of the work that Maggie was talking about, there's amazing interfaith communities in the Austin area that do that kind of really interesting work. But IAM's focus is really on right now on healing and belonging for the community internally, for the American Arab Muslim Middle Eastern community. Yeah.
One thing I see in the Christian community and other religions is there's still a tendency for one group to disrespect another Christian group because, I mean, they may be the wrong color. You know, they may be Black Baptists, and these are white Baptists that are talking. And is there a similar kind of upset sometimes within the Muslim community? It's like you're the wrong kind of Muslim.
Absolutely, right. We are all human, and we are all damn tribalistic creatures. give human beings anywhere a reason to like sort of distrust or disavow one another, and we'll seize on it. But yeah, specifically, you talked about race, and right when Muslim immigrants come over to the United States, very often the exposure that they've had to American media has already taught them a lot about Blackness and how Blackness is perceived in this country. They've seen Black characters on TV or in movies depicted a very particular kind of way again and again, and they've already internalized a whole host of really racist and anti-Black ideas, before they even set foot here. The same way each one of us in this room has, right? We've all been exposed to the same media that engages in a lot of anti-Black tropes, and we have to actively unlearn and undo all of that. And so this takes place, of course, in religious communities as well, right? There's a really large African American Muslim community that has been here since the very beginning. I think 20% of the enslaved people who were brought over were actually Muslim. And so we've had Muslim folks practicing on American soil since before this country was founded. And so there are those tensions, right? There are different practices of Islam. Some of them are hundreds of years or thousands of miles removed from one another. They have different ideas about how worship is, how community works, all of this. They're differently influenced by their cultural practices in their own home countries or communities, all sorts of stuff. And those clashes definitely do play out as this community finds its own identity and articulation in this country. And we're working on it, right? We all have to heal from those differences and those clashes and try and make something work.
It's just interesting to see people in the Christian community that say they're all for getting along with everyone, unless you're a Catholic, or unless you're the wrong kind of Methodist. And I just found that very odd. But they're supposed to be teaching love and peace and getting along, but only with certain kinds of people. And hopefully we can all get past that whole situation.
It really is hard to, I mean, you saying there are all these different types of it's not the Muslim group, it's all different Muslims groups. Mm-hmm. But and we do the same thing in Christianity, I suppose. I mean, I'm not Christian, but this country is, right? I mean, it's not supposed to be, but we all kind of know it is, right? So, and would you say that's the same of, say, Pakistan or India, Hinduism, and does that kind of track over there too? And they just have the infighting like we do. Well, infighting. I mean, they're kind of.
Yes and no, right? So there are countries that are expressly and clearly, and they tell they declare themselves to be Islamic countries or Islamic republics. In terms of actually being countries with a continuous sort of history of Islamic governance, that stopped after the Ottoman Empire fell. Since then, there's been a clear difference. And all countries today are nation states in a very particular different kind of way than a Islamic state that doesn't exist anymore. And then in terms of other countries, you had mentioned India. India has this really cool kind of secularism that's very particular to an Indian context, where the government for most of its history was, supporting and financially supporting Muslims as they went on their pilgrimages, Christians as they went on theirs, and various Hindu groups as they went on their pilgrimages, right? So it's a very different kind of secularism where the state is supporting each of the major religions and making sure that they have the resources that they need to be in the cultures that they are in. And then in addition to that, there's also this really cool secularism around like family law, right? So there's a set of laws that applies to everyone equally, but when it comes to certain things like divorce or inheritance or things like this, they have a capacity to allow judges in the judicial system to apply a Islamic code of laws to you if you're a Muslim, a Christian set of code of laws to you if you're a Christian, a Parsi code of laws for you if you're from that community, all of this. So it's a whole different, it's secularism, but a very different kind of secularism than we're used to. And of course, within the last couple decades, though, that there has been a strong backsliding there. There has been a far-right Hindu nationalist movement within India that's been absolutely tragic. Yeah.
I don't know why everybody doesn't just join the Church of the Subgenius.
Well, Scientology.
Or Scientology.
Scientology has got, it's got its hooks in everybody. You're not gonna.
Well,
I'm not a big advocate for
John
Scientology.
Travolta, so I won't be joining.
You're not what?
I don't want to hang out with John Travolta, so I won't be joining.
Oh, you don't have to. You can hang out with Tom Cruise.
That's so much better.
Mm-hmm. We can cause a split in the Church of Scientology. There'll be the Tom Cruise folks over here and the Travolta folks over there.
I'm Travolta wing.
I'm good at that. I'm good at that. I know. Wouldn't that be something if we actually did that? That would be amazing.
Belief is a problem, really. It's divisive. People are will believe something and will identify so strongly with that belief that anyone who doesn't share their belief is considered, persona non grata. Of course,
what does that remind me of? Something that happened here sometime.
Well, you were talking about how America was.
You mean like MAGA?
Is a Christian country. Yeah, MAGA. America is a Christian country, but supposedly it's not. Supposedly we have a very strong ethic of religious tolerance in the USA. But practically speaking, a lot of people early on were Christians, and the shadow of Christianity is there. And unfortunately, it seems that Christians in some sects or some parts of Christianity are less tolerant than maybe we would hope for them to be.
In the last 4 years, there's been more of a tradition of religious intolerance that's crept in, because just
really shown me what the
religious leaders are saying incredibly strange and offensive things to people that they're supposed to be united with, but it's once again you're the wrong kind of Christian, you're the wrong kind of Muslim, you're the wrong kind of Buddhist, and until we get past that, it's just going to always be a problem.
And I don't see that. I've like a lot of you guys, I'm sure. I just feel like I'm banging my head against a wall. It seems like we make a few steps forward and then get just dragged all the way back, and it's so important to keep moving forward, because otherwise you just give up, right? But the headway just seems, every time this mass shooting shit happens, I feel like I get kicked in the gut, and it's like, and told once again, this is not the time to discuss it. Well, when is the time to discuss it? Like right now would be a good time to maybe discuss some other things that were happening and y'all didn't want to discuss. And maybe next week we could discuss this. Why is this not a good time to talk about it? This is the perfect time to talk about gun control. It's, I think that it's the perfect time to talk about Asians and what this country has done to them since
Wow.
since Japan.
I have a theory about the gun control thing, if you'd care to hear it, which is that I mean, you know, the issue in front of us is not so much that people want to prevent people from having guns, but that guns that are purely for the purpose of killing humans, some of us would argue should not be readily available, should in fact be illegal, like an AR-15 being a perfect example of that. And the question keeps coming up is, why would ordinary citizens want to own an AR-15? And I actually believe that this is driven by sort of the militia kind of folks who, yeah, they absolutely want to have a gun that is that powerful. But the reason that they would want to have a gun that was that powerful is because at some point they may feel that they have to take back the government.
That's exactly right.
And that's kind of an unspoken possibility.
And I hear that possibility, and I say to those folks, right? So when we have a government that is increasingly terrorizing its population, that is going into certain neighborhoods and engaging in a police state in certain neighborhoods for certain communities of folks, they live in a police state. Their civil liberties are severely restricted. Their ability to express themselves is severely restricted. Their ability to be critical of the government that they live under is severely restricted and surveilled. When the tyranny is here, when that's taking place, where are y'all? Are you showing up? Are these militias that are supposedly, again, you know, ready to operate against government tyranny, surveillance, all of this? Where are they?
Well, are they in support of the tyranny?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did see that they just made the connection of conspiracy betwixt the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys.
Yeah,
So,
and the 3%ers, and very definite connection.
so yeah,
No.
there's actual connection, conversing.
You know, I'm all for, you know, someone having a gun, one gun that they use perhaps for hunting, but I see no reason why somebody should have 70 guns and a flamethrower and a military vehicle parked out back and bomb making materials. That's not a militia. That's a
crazy person.
Yeah,
that's just a really.
I do kind of want to have a flamethrower, though.
Well,
I don't have one now, but if anybody has one for sale, let me know.
I have some hairspray and a lighter.
Yeah, this is also what happens when we live in a culture in a culture that has, you know, decades of glorification of military, glorification of violence, all of this. We internalize these values, right? We want to be driving around an armored vehicle that we see on TV. We want to have the same guns that we see on TV that are fighting the terrorists over there that we think are going to be on our doorsteps here. We've got an itching. We're pretty militaristic now, and that's, I think, why we want to have this whole militarized weaponry and systems at our home as well.
Well, unfortunately, every time there is a new shooting, and I'll see somebody, you know, their thread on their wall is, you know, the hand wringing, like, why? What, you know, like we're talking about, right? Every single time I post, there's a song by Negativland. It's called Guns. It came out in the 90s, and somebody did this really great video to it. It, you know, the whole song, it's like an 8-minute song, and it's more like a social commentary. Mm-hmm. And it shows you where this came from. I mean, you know, it's as all the boomers can remember when they were growing up, is the glorification of, you know, the guns and shooting the cowboys and Indians, and
Manifest Destiny,
super secret, you know, secret agent machine gun, and everything was guns, you know. So the song is going guns, guns, and, you know, just the shooting. It's an incredible piece of work. And, you know, and I remember growing up in that culture. There's some film footage from my family and my, so, you know, y'all know I was born at Guantanamo, right? So it's like we have home movies because my dad was Navy, and my brothers are in their crew cuts, right? And they're wearing their little army gear and their helmets and their guns, and, you know, it's like they're gonna be just like Dad, you know. And like, oh gee, we wonder where it came from. I don't know.
Yeah, I experienced that whole gun culture thing when my daughter was 3 years old, living in Dallas, and I had her in a daycare. And apparently they had a lot of those little toy guns that people played with. I came one day and the owner of the daycare was all upset because my daughter had been bullied by some big kid. So she grabbed one of those guns and pistol whipped him with it.
Nice.
And she was outraged, and it's like, well, he's a foot taller than her. And I didn't like the fact that, he had them all playing with guns, but,
The irony of this enduring manifest destiny of guns is really just devastating, literally before our eyes, devastating. We continue to believe that this country was made, because of the free and the Second Amendment, and it's become more important than the First Amendment.
A really curious part of the thread that I'm following here is that the cultures that we engage with sort of nationally, right? Like manifest destiny, when you have a population that is literally, you're occupying their territory, you have to military fight against them again and again for decades as you expand. That bakes its way into the national consciousness. That kind of awareness does not. And I think something similar happens when it comes to the war on terror and the militarism we've engaged with internationally when it comes to the idea of terror and terrorism, right? So in the first instances, right after 9/11, we passed things like the Patriot Act, and we severely limit civil liberties for people internationally. For US citizens who are in a certain area, it's okay to extrajudicially kill them without a trial, without a reason, all of that good stuff. Certain populations are targeted and seen as sort of more expendable and allowed to die, allowed to be killed, all of this stuff. And then slowly but surely, those same logics of war and of empire that we engage with internationally and abroad make their way back home. And the surveillance that we were promised and assured would only take place internationally, all of a sudden surveilling US citizens as well on a mass basis. The restriction of civil liberties for folks internationally when it comes to trials related to terrorism, all of a sudden makes its way back home as well. The culture of violence and policing, right? The equipment that local city police departments have is a direct, the same equipment that we're using internationally to fight folks as we are an occupying force in other countries. We're using those same tactics, tools, and training of occupying forces in foreign countries on our population domestically. Yeah. Right. So the cultures of war that we have inevitably make their way all the way back home.
Wow. And that's definitely those are red flags like crazy. It's not, I know that a lot of the defund the police stuff had to do with the ownership or procurement of tanks and stuff like this from the military. And the pushback on that was, oh no, they're giving them to us. Mm-hmm. It's a whole different fearful thing for me. What do you mean you're giving them a tank and a surface to air missile launcher? What do you mean? And they don't have to. Go ahead.
What does that do to the perception and the relationship between the local police department and how they think about the communities that they work with, right? If the tools that you have dictate the way that you interact with your environment and world, and if the tools that you have are tools of military and of war, that's the way you're going to interact with the population you're with. Yeah. Before out, I really wanted to list off for y'all a couple of the right. So we have CVE programs. They're this federally funded program that gives grant aid to lots of local police departments, local hospitals, all sorts of colleges, universities, mayor's offices, things like this. And they are designed to target and surveil local, largely Muslim populations for signs of terroristic activity, for signs of radicalization. And I wanted to read out some of the things that they're looking for.
And where can we find these lists? Is this your list?
This is my list, but a lot of it, the Brennan Center for Justice has a chart of CDE terrorism indicators that are looked at nationally. And so you can find that list there as well. And I can send you the link, Susie, if you want to throw it up.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So these are things like growing a beard, right? If you've ever grown a beard, you may be radicalized and may be a terrorist, feeling isolated or alienated. If you're frustrated at US policy and events around the globe. So I see folks on this call have expressed frustration with US policy events around the globe.
Three
and there are a
dudes
couple
have
folks on this call
beards.
with a beard as well. Y'all are targets. If you engage with social media for upwards of 3.5 hours a day for youth 16 to 24 years of age, which is every young person I know between 16 and 24, you're a potential target. If you have real or perceived experiences of social exclusion or discrimination, right? So if you're a Somali immigrant young person and there is real discrimination against you or perceived discrimination against you, you are a target for potential radicalization.
Oh my God.
If you want to feel wanted and useful in the society that you operate in, that's another red flag for them. If you have a generational shift and you think differently than your parents, that's a red flag. If there's discrimination, yeah.
Red? Are there any flags that are blue or green or?
None of that. None of that at all. And these are specific to communities too, right? So there's also specific factors that target Somali youth, right? Unaccountable times and unobserved spaces for Somali youth. So if Somali youth are meeting and doing things in unaccountable time, hanging out with each other in unaccountable time or unobserved by law enforcement, that's a potential threat. They're potentially radicalized and should be targeted by these CVE programs.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the funny thing is none of this is based in data or research around what actually causes someone to be radical. These are not actual risk factors.
These are just things someone said, this is probably a good thing to do. And a lot of this stuff is disseminated by the fusion centers, which has popped up all over the country, where they have centralized all of their intelligence operations. And I'm sure you'll find those kind of lists, right there on the desk at the fusion centers. We have one here.
It's crazy.
As much as I'd love to blame this on Trump, it's not him. This has been going on.
It's not. This is an Obama era program. It's
Yeah.
It's really popular amongst the Democratic Party because it's seen as a softer form of policing. It's seen as more acceptable. It's seen as cops going into communities and surveilling communities, which is apparently better. But in the Trump era, there were changes to this program. So in the Trump era, about 85% of CVE grants and over half of CVE programs explicitly targeted minority communities. This included Muslim communities explicitly targeted, LGBTQ communities, Black Lives Matter activists, immigrants, and refugees. So these are programs that shifted and said, these are the communities that have the most threat for radicalization, and these are the communities we're going to target.
So pretty much all the people we know.
All our friends. Yeah. And 14 out of the 26 programs under the Trump era were funded by the Department of Homeland Security, targeted schools and students, some as young as 5 years old, right? So your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old is being trained in looking for signs of radicalization in their peers and in their community as well.
Did you see Sacha Baron Cohen's Who is America?
No, I haven't.
All right, so I can't remember which episode it is, but you guys should look it up. It's about guns, and you talk about radicalization. He gets these people in Congress, including Joe Walsh, to do commercials for children to learn how to shoot guns. And he says, in no time, your first grader could become a first grenader. I mean, shit like that.
Well, that's easy for those guys to do because they know if they do such a thing in reality, that'll mean money from the NRA.
Yeah, and these were commercials that they all did together. Trent Lott did it. I mean, I'll send you guys the link. It is just jaw-dropping. Wow. And if it's white guys and they want their white kids, that's all it is. It's white supremacy. Once again.
We have 2 minutes left. Ramish, tell us what we as individuals should be thinking about to make a difference in this whole thing we've been talking about today.
Yeah. First and foremost, be connecting with these communities in your area, right? So don't remain isolated. There are Muslim folks in your area. They're inevitably organizing. They're inevitably talking to each other, making community with each other. Be connected to them. Follow sort of, on your social media feeds, make sure your social media feeds are diverse, make sure they're including young Muslims, young Arab Christians, all sorts of folks, young Somali people. See what the conversation is going on for other folks as well. And yeah, continue to make those connections, continue to keep it local. And you can always, if you want to do more direct work on CVE or TVTP, go look up who are the grant recipients for CVE in my area. If I'm in Houston, it's the mayor's office. They've received CVE grants. Okay, well, who did they in turn fund as well going down the chain? Is it my local hospital that's receiving CVE or TVTP grants? How can I work to counter that and tell them, this isn't a good program, y'all want to be engaged in? Is it my local mayor's office? Is it my local police department? How are these people continuing to engage in these kinds of programs that are harmful, and how can we work against them? Be thinking about that with your communities.
Very cool. Thank you so much for being on. Are there any other podcasts you might want to plug?
Yeah, go and listen to I Am the Defining Moment. Go and check out the Red. Oh my goodness. Susie, tell me more about the Red Peace Machine.
No, I don't know. You were going to promote some podcast you're now doing. What was it called? Red Peace?
Yeah, the Red Peace Machine. Listen, search out for it on your YouTube, on your Spotify, on your Apple Podcasts. Red Peace Machine, I Am the Defining Moment, and Plutopia, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ramesh.
Thanks for coming, Ramesh.
Of course.
Let's do it again.
Later. Bye.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.